Now we're moving into the Disney era. When I found out, that Disney was going to buy Lucasfilm and we were going to see new Star Wars films, of course I was excited. Who wasn't? But at the same time, I was skeptical because these weren't going to be the movies that George Lucas was talking about all the way in the 80s of doing episodes 7, 8, and 9. No, Disney pretty much ditched his original concept. So these movies are just kind of something extra. They're just something separate from the other 6 movies, even though they are continuing the story. I have given a full-length review of The Force Awakens, so I'm not going to go too in-depth, but after seeing it a couple more times after that review, it still holds up. And I know it's only been a year, but it's a fun film. I liked it from the first week I saw it. I saw it 3 times that week. I think the biggest flaw for me is the pacing. Something about the pacing of that movie, it moves very fast all the time. I mean, when you hear the characters talking, like Rey and Finn, whenever they get really excited, they spew out their dialogue really fast, so it's really hard to distill what's really going on. And I was watching that movie in the theaters, and I was like, all right, slow it down a little bit. I know I said that A New Hope moved a little slowly, but, even Empire and Jedi had their kind of slow moments where, we were able to breathe a little bit. I know, we all have ADD now, so you have to do everything really fast. But seriously, that was my biggest issue. I love the new characters, but for me, honestly, the part that I really walked away from was whenever they reintroduced a classic character. My 2 favorite parts of the movie was where we saw Han and Chewie, loved that. But the scene where they're running past the Millennium Falcon, you barely see it, then they stop, the camera turns around, and there's the Millennium Falcon, and they have the classic Star Wars theme as Rey and Finn are running to it. I mean, that was a huge moment for me, and for the audience as well. I mean, the audience went crazy when that moment came up, because that's the moment that it really felt like Star Wars. And yes, it does draw on A New Hope a lot for its story. I mean, I remember joking before the movie came out, like saying, what if they were going to go after a 3rd Death Star? And that's what they did. But I do genuinely feel that there's enough new stuff in that movie to make it feel fresh. Now we're going to move on to Rogue One. It's the one movie that I really haven't had a chance to talk about yet. I did see it opening day. Gareth Edwards directed it. Gareth Edwards directed the 2014 Godzilla, which I also saw, and I used that movie to kind of set my expectations around this movie. With Godzilla, whenever he showed Godzilla, it was awesome. But the characters in that movie were forgettable, so the movie was forgettable. So with Rogue One, I wasn't looking as forward to this movie as I was with, like, Episode 7. I don't think most people were until they saw it. Seeing it, though, finally, I love the concept that you have a movie that's separate from the story, but takes place in the universe. So there are still ways of exploring this universe without going back to the tired old Skywalker saga. And I don't mean to say it that way, because those episodes 8 and 9, those are the movies that I really want to see, like everybody else. But with Rogue One, the action scenes were great, and like everybody else, I thought that 3rd act was really well done. It was awesome. It made me feel like I was watching Return of the Jedi for parts of it. But the characters, again, just like in Godzilla, they were decent characters, but at the end of the day, I didn't feel for any of these characters. It was hard. I was rooting for them, but when stuff happens, I just didn't really care. And that goes for the main character too. And given that with the Star Wars film, that's to have forgettable characters is not really a good thing. This was the first Star Wars movie that I didn't really feel compelled to see it a second time. Of course, when the Blu-ray comes out, I'll see it a couple of times then, but it's not something I'll return to. It's not something I can really say I'll see a bunch of times. Like all of the prior films, I've seen a dozen times, even with their flaws and everything. I still, once in a while, like to have marathons and things. So this one will be nice to kind of revisit. But I do have a few predictions, though. I don't really know what I feel about having them digitally put in Peter Cushing and Carrie Fisher. When I first saw Peter Cushing in there, I knew it wasn't him, and I couldn't really process what I was seeing. And then as he started to move, I realized he was a digital character. I thought it looked good. It really took me out of the movie, though. But I can see them kind of starting to do this now in a lot of the newer Star Wars movies. I would not be surprised, because Ewan McGregor returned for Force Awakens just to record a couple of voiceovers, nothing big, but I would not be surprised if in the next 2 movies you see them put in Alec Guinness and maybe use Ewan McGregor to do the voiceovers. Unfortunately, because of Carrie Fisher's passing, I kind of see them going that route with her too. Maybe not the full movie. You know, she might have a couple of scenes, but I definitely feel, especially since Carrie Fisher gave her permission to have them digitally use her younger self in Rogue One, and Peter Cushing's family actually gave their permission. They have to. I really don't see them not doing more Star Wars movies without using that technology. The one other thing I want to talk about briefly are the action scenes in Rogue One. They were awesome. But I remember watching, one thing Gareth Edwards does really well is scope. One of my favorite sequences in that movie, or parts of that movie, is when they're down on the beach and the rebels are fighting up the they're attacking the Imperial walkers. And I remember watching that scene and being blown away because, again, it's shot beautifully. But I was also, in the back of my mind, I was going, are those walkers models like in Empire Strikes Back, or are they CGI? And I came to the conclusion that they were probably done with CGI, but because of the way that Edwards shot it, it looked great. And this is what I want to talk about. Why do we feel the need, all of us, to kind of criticize the CGI in a movie? Back in the 80s, you know, when we were watching these or any other movies that used puppets and things, did we sit there and go like, oh, that's a puppet. That is totally a puppet. I can see the strings on it. It looks fake. No, I remember seeing a movie like this, like Star Wars or anything else that had some kind of effect, and just accepting what was there, being like, oh, okay, that's a character in the movie, and yeah, it's a puppet, but it's cool. But ever since CGI, it feels like we're constantly criticizing it, like we've never accepted it. And I think, first of all, people need to realize that this is 2017 now. The way they make movies now is different than they used to, and we have to kind of accept that, because if they kept making movies like they used to, we'd still be watching silent films that were all black and white. So I just don't understand like this need to really criticize everything for being CGI heavy and why people want more practical effects in their movies. And even when movies do use practical effects, like The Force Awakens did, they still tend to criticize the CGI a lot. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and it seems to pop up whenever we discuss Star Wars. You know, for example, like people criticize Star Wars, the prequels, for having so much CGI, and then they go to praise Avatar, which to me has kind of that same problem. Why do we criticize it? Like, is it okay because it's James Cameron versus George Lucas? James Cameron might have a stronger overall library of work, but he's not fallible. He's made some stuff that's not that great, or at least memorable. And I didn't think Avatar really deserved the praise it got, because that had an overabundance of CGI too. Is Star Wars the only film franchise that has to be stuck in the 80s? Like, is that the only film franchise that can't evolve? It's just funny, like, nobody complains when the new Avengers movie or the new comic book adaptation uses digital effects, but with Star Wars it's like, oh no, everything has to be practical. It's just funny. Just something to think about, something I don't really hear a lot of people talk about, and I could be in the minority on that one too, you know, whatever, that's just me being honest. So anyway, it is the 20th anniversary of the 20th anniversary of Star Wars, and to celebrate, take out your old VHS copy of Star Wars or whatever copy you want to watch and have some fun and, you know, watch it again for the first time. Thanks. Huh. It really does just say Star Wars.